Hello, my friends. We are working our way through the essence of the Bhagavad Gita commentary by Swami Kriyananda. To entertain myself this afternoon, I actually tried to figure it out. We are almost exactly 1/3 of the way through the book, although we're only up to chapter 4 out of 18, but it's not evenly divided. The commentaries are slightly shorter for the second part of the book. Second 2/3. I say that because whenever we start one of these huge books, the movement of the bookmark through it is always a very important issue for me. It may not mean anything to you, but it means a lot to me because I'm always so amazed how time passes. This is how I can tell. I'm being a little silly, but you'll have to indulge me. Let's now pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest Swamiji, help us to understand the wisdom of your commentary. Master's mission in this world was to interpret the Bhagavad Gita and the New Testament and show that the original teachings of both masters were the same. Guide us that we may have your understanding and see in these ancient teachings ideas, vibrations, inspiration, example that will help us to live day by day in this world in attunement with your divine presence. Om, peace. Amen. Let's just have a brief moment of silence. Om, peace. Amen. So, as I said before we prayed, we are in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita of 18 chapters. We're in the Swami arranged chapters within the commentary, which are unrelated to the chapters of the Gita itself. I mean, the numbering is not the same. Right now we are in the supreme science of knowing. And so we we're on chapter 4, verse 37. I started commenting about it last week, but the commentary is quite interesting and longer. So we're just right in the middle and we'll go through. But let me reread the verse. Chapter 4, verse 37. O Arjuna, as fire burns wood to ashes, so does the fire of wisdom burn to ashes all one's karma. Karma is everything on the spiritual path. Let me just see if he says that. Yes, he says karma is of many kinds, since karma means only action. I think I spoke about it last week, that my practical way of understanding karma is that karma is an unlearned lesson, and action then therefore proceeds from it, because our process as we come towards self-realization and come to an understanding of our true nature as one with the divine, we are moving from the periphery of our self, really, from the periphery of ourself, ever closer into the center of to our origin point. And when we merge with that origin point, that is that is when we become one with the divine. And I may have said this last week, but it bears repeating. Swami talked about the fact that because creation seems so complex, we tend to think that the Creator is the most complex of all. But what is day to the worldly person is night to the yogi, and what is night to the yogi is day to the worldly person. And there's many, many ways you can interpret those words from the Gita, but one of the simplest ways is much that the egoic mind considers to be true, the truth is actually the reverse. And so this is one of those things where life is so complicated that we imagine that the divine creator must be even more complicated. But Swami says it's just the opposite, because we're moving from duality, which is constantly swinging and ever variegated, into a place of absolute stillness. And the closer you get to stillness, the less options there are, the fewer options they are. The closer you get to stillness, the closer you get to just one. So let's see now. Oh yes. So to have karma, I mean, when we finally merge into the divine, we have no more unlearned lessons, using the picture that I use. We have no more unlearned lessons. We have understood that everything we're seeking, everything we're longing, all the cause of our suffering was because we had desire for anything other than the divine. Anything that we desire other than the divine, our alternate theories of happiness, create karma because it's an unlearned lesson. I've read the scripture, I've heard my master speak, I've had intuitive understandings that everything I seek will be found in God. However, I have this one little lingering thing, I have this one thought, and so therefore we can't come into stillness because we're being tugged. So some action follows. So karma as action, it takes us away from stillness. That's why you can advance quite far, and then still you'll get drawn into things that will happen because there's still unlearned energies that'll pull you out. Now, Swami begins to talk about different kinds of karma, which is what I'm going to express here, but wait just a second, let me make sure I finish that thought. So karma being an action, it's an action compelled by some belief within us, which is manifested as we hold on to a desire. Now see, bear in mind, when something stops attracting us, we don't have to try to stop wanting it. We just don't want it anymore. And Master gives us something that's both, distressing and also very encouraging. He says, in the course of all our incarnations, we test out every theory of happiness. He said, anything, there's this weird fact about human nature, which is we listen when people tell us things, but we know it when we've actually had an experience that supports it. So it isn't enough to be told. In fact, we believe the scripture and we believe the master and we believe our parents or whoever is guiding us. We believe them when there's some resonant experience within us. And that's why you can't really convert someone to this teaching, because it doesn't make any sense unless you've had some resonant experience that matches what the principles of the path of self-realization are about. So, Master says everything that we really know at this point about where suffering comes from and where happiness comes from, we know because we conducted the experiment, we had the experience, and now we can say for certain. Now, if you stop and think about it, we don't even stop to consider all the things that we absolutely know we don't want to do, because they don't even rise to the level of being an issue. There's no compelling need, there's no unlearned lesson there. And Master enumerates that, which every foible to which mankind is subject, disloyalty, excessive greed, violence against others, selfishness of the most egregious kind. If we look right at it and think, no, I never want to do that, Master says that's because we have. So from that experience, we understand the difference between knowing that you shouldn't do something and having it not even arise that you would do that. And so we still have some karma in certain areas, even though we may know, this is going to cause me suffering, but there's something in us that's pulling us toward action. And it's the short-term pleasure of something versus the long-term loss. I used to have these dreams. Thank you, God, I haven't had them in a long time. I didn't have it. It wasn't for years, but there was a certain sort of period where I had a few dreams like this. And in the dream always tended to start sort of after the main event, like something had happened in which I was at fault. And I had done something that violated my fundamental principles. And as a consequence, my life was going to fall apart. So an act of treachery, an act of disloyalty, an act of greed, whatever it might have been. Sometimes I sort of knew what I had done, but it was just more like, I can't believe that I did this, but I did. And then my life is going to fall to pieces as I've known it. And the dreams were always so vivid. And then I would wake up with such an incredible sense of relief that it wasn't really happening, that I believe it did happen. But I learned not to do that again. But there still, somehow in my subconscious, actually I considered it a grace to have those dreams. They didn't make any sense. It wasn't like I was being tempted or anything like that. But my subconscious mind wanted me to know never again. And it just had planted such a strong feeling in me that it visited me in my dreams, that to me is a really terrific good karma. But it also, again, it helped me understand what it is when karma is really gone. It helped me to see that there comes a point where you just can't be tempted by that. Now, one can be tempted still by many other things. I'm not talking about perfect freedom here. But there's no inclination to take that particular kind of action. Okay? So that's what we're working our way through here. Now, let me just think about this. Swami, he had talked about earlier, and I started talking about it, karma is of many kinds last week. Since karma means only action, karma can be national, communal, family, individual, and then we talked about anything that proceeds from a coherent center of intention, which attracts the consequences back to that center. And that coherent center of intention is my ego self trying to get what it thinks it needs for its happiness. So when we're talking about personal karma, Swami just makes the interesting comment that someone who is a national leader, for example, may actually be the instrument of national karma, and he might not be as personally responsible for it because he's caught in the forces. He happens to be the leader who's standing there. Master actually made a distinction between Stalin and Hitler, neither of whom were anything to be proud of. But he said Hitler was an instrument of national karma, whereas Stalin was personally responsible for the suffering he caused. Now, don't think that means that Hitler wasn't also responsible. But Master explained that the karmic burden that they as individuals would carry was quite different. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's just a fascinating thing to contemplate. Swami also talks about even in group karma, and he uses as the example when an airplane crashes in such a way that everybody is killed. He says, somewhat confusingly, it may not have been everybody's karma to die, but a person who did not have strong enough karma to live could get caught up in the flow of energy, and then they would lose their life also. He said, by contrast, whenever there's that kind of a catastrophe or an earthquake or a fire, something like that, there's always interesting examples of people who should have been there, but something pulled them the other way. There was an example of that in our own community. Not with one of our members, but with the mother of a member. There was this girl who lived there, and her mother lived in Chicago. This was many years ago. Her mother lived in Chicago and had a ticket and was going to come out to visit her daughter in California. For no particular reason, I mean, there was no external impetus, but the daughter called her mother and says, "Mom, this is just not a good time to come." The mother said, "I've already bought my ticket." She said, "I know, but this is really not the time to visit. Postpone it, come next month." The mother was quite disgruntled, but canceled her ticket. And that very flight crashed, and everybody on it was killed. And there was no premonition on the part of the daughter that she was saving her mother's life. She just felt it wasn't the right time. And I mean, it was a very dramatic plane crash in the field of understanding of America. And for us at Ananda, knowing that, this woman that we knew had been saved because things happen. And her karma to continue her life. So the first time I heard about that particular statement, there was another terrible crash from Las Vegas, which is a gambling center, to somewhere else in the U.S. And the whole plane went down, everyone died, and there was one man who was about to get on the plane, but he felt lucky. And so he turned around and went back to the casino instead of leaving Las Vegas. He did win a lot of money. But then he found out that the plane, he was literally at the airport when this sort of feeling came over him, and Divine Mother worked through his gambling enthusiasm and his desire for money, but it was stronger than the group karma for him to die. So when I heard all of these stories, when I first heard them, what this is really about is we must constantly be making conscious decisions about who we are and what we do, because that, to be swept up in group karma, means that you don't have enough magnetism of your own, that one is in the habit of just passively going along with life. And that is not the way of the devotee. To calmly surrender to divine will is quite different than to just passively let things happen. And that's the kind of energy that causes you to get swept up in things. And then you have national karma, and right now, our whole world is caught up. This is being recorded in June of 2021. We have been going through, maybe we're at the end of, I hope so, but we have been going through on a whole planetary scale this involvement with this COVID virus. And there are many other kinds of karma that Master has predicted which are going to envelop this planet. We have been very neglectful of the needs of the earth itself, and Master has told us that it is likely that there will be what he called cataclysms, which Swami interpreted to mean that Mother Earth herself is going to respond. Master spoke of violent international events. Perhaps, who knows? Who really knows? This is a whole different subject that has been much discussed. Swami wrote a small book called The Road Ahead, in which he collected all of the prophecies that Master made. And he spoke of some years of great upheaval. Is this just the beginning of it? According to that prophecy, it might. I'm not a prophet, so I can't say. But I've lived my whole adult life with this expectation. And you don't have to be a prophet to see that selfishness and greed and race hatred and prejudice are ripping our societies apart. In Autobiography of a Yogi, it says Babaji and Jesus are quite concerned about the excessive materialism and prejudices and hatreds. And they have plotted our salvation, which is Kriya Yoga. So Swami also writes in here, and it's very important for us to understand that as we change our personal consciousness, because Master said these difficulties are not coming as a punishment, but they're coming to awaken us to our relationship to a greater reality and to bring our whole civilization, our global civilization, because we're moving into a higher age, and in higher ages the world is one society, is unified in its understanding, and we can see that happening. That's where we're moving, but all of it is so materialistically oriented. And for us to move into a higher yuga, we have to come to a deeper understanding. So the suffering that our own folly is going to impose upon us is to bring us to a deeper understanding of God. So if we begin now to do everything we can to develop within ourselves, and then also to be able to share with others a deeper understanding of the divine, then the necessity for those catastrophes to be imposed upon us personally certainly is mitigated. Now, we can't just be trying to strike a bargain with God. I'm going to do Kriya from now till the beginning of the war, and then I'm not going to get drafted. That's what's known as a Vaishya approach to spirituality. A Vaishya is, the classic image of a Vaishya is a merchant. And the merchant is quite willing to give good value, but only if the price is good. And so the idea of Vaishya thinking, which is the second of the four castes, Vaishya thinking is that I will put out energy, but only if there's something in it for me. And I will always keep score, and I will always be trading. I'll be trading mine for what I get. Now, Vaishya is better than the sheer passivity of being a Shudra, where we don't put out any energy, and the only thing that'll motivate us is threat of punishment. Self-interest is a step up from that. But self-interest is just an ego-active quality. Better that the ego be active than that the ego be asleep. Just passive and low energy. But it's not the unity with the divine that we're looking for. But oftentimes, people start out on their spiritual search in a Vaishya way. Either to avoid suffering, to please God, to be safe, whatever it might be. There was a very interesting story I read many years ago, closer to the time when it happened, when a soccer team, football they would call it, but in America we call it a soccer team, from Uruguay, if I'm not mistaken, crashed in the Andes. And it was high in the mountains, and it was presumed that everyone had died. They couldn't find the wreck, so it was a terrible tragedy. As it happens, a percentage of the people on that plane, maybe it was as much as a third or a quarter, they didn't die, but they actually lived through the terrible winter. They lived through the whole experience, and eventually two of them walked out of the mountains, and the remaining survivors were rescued. All of that, there's a book called Alive, and then there's a book that was written by the man who walked out to save them. And I highly recommend both stories, even though they're a little chilling. Don't read them late at night if you're alone. But they're also very deeply spiritual, because what happened to these people and what really held them together was a transcendent kind of energy that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. But here's the interesting point for this. the captain of the team was a very charismatic and very popular man, and he survived the crash. And they were naturally, he was the natural leader of the group, genuinely. So even though it wasn't a soccer game anymore, they were still all looking to him to be the leader. And they had for a time a radio. They salvaged the radio from the plane or something that ran until the batteries ran out. And in the course of being able to listen, they were able to listen to the world news. They heard that they were being searched for. And then at a certain point, the news came out that the search was being stopped because they were persuaded that everyone was dead and there was no point. Now, the captain of the team was very devout. Actually, all of them were devout. They were devout Catholics. And the captain of the team was very devout. And he was very positive and very up about his expectations of what was going to happen, until he heard that they'd been given up for dead. And then within just a few days, he died. He just lost all his will and all his hope, and he died. And the way it was even explained in the book was that even though he was very devoted, on a deeper level, his relationship with God was a Vaishya relationship. And he had behaved properly. He'd done everything the priest had wanted him to do. He'd been a very good Catholic. He assumed God would rescue him. And when God didn't rescue him, he completely lost faith and lost hope. Now, that's a very extreme example, I agree. Now, what comes after the Vaishya is the Kshatriya level. And the Kshatriya level is, we do it because it's the right thing to do. And the Kshatriya is motivated entirely by principle and by ideals. And the satisfaction of what is being done is the satisfaction of knowing that one is behaving according to the ideals in which I believe that I have dedicated my life to. And then whatever comes back is assumed to be in line with those ideals. And we have to progress as devotees from doing it as a bargain to the point where we're living according to these ideals because this is simply who I am. I remember a certain just incident in my life, and I was well established on the spiritual path, so it wasn't as if it was created in this moment, but I became very deeply aware. I happened to be sitting alone in the living room of whatever house I was living in at that time. And there was a picture of Master on the wall, as there are pictures of the gurus all over the whatever house I live in. And I was just looking at Master's picture. And I realized that I was following the path with the dedication that I've followed it for decades, just because that's who I am. It wasn't an affectation on any level. It was just who I am. And it was a very comforting thought. Because I could see that I'd become really deeply convinced. And I was amused. It acted out in a less dramatic way. That was a very deep moment for me. But in a less dramatic, a seemingly more trivial, but also very important moment. When I was traveling to India by myself, and I went on what I believe is called Asiana Airlines. It's a South Korean airline. I'd never flown it before, and I had a layover in Seoul, South Korea, and I had about maybe 4 hours, something like that. So I was really there. I didn't know anybody, and when I travel by myself, I get I enjoy becoming intensely solitary. So I was in the airport just completely alone in a country I'd never been in before, in an airport I'd never been in before. And I don't speak any language but English, but I certainly don't speak any Korean or know anything about Korean. And I just had this thought, what if the world ends right now? What if one of those, something happens and all the electronic systems go down and all I can do for the rest of my life is live in South Korea. And I just let that play out. And I saw myself doing what all immigrants have had to do who don't speak the language, no matter how highly skilled they are. They have to take very menial jobs until they can educate themselves and learn the language and the customs. And so for some reason I saw myself cleaning hotel rooms. Although if I thought about it, if there were hotel rooms that needed cleaning, I would have been able to fly out. But anyway, I was cleaning hotel rooms. I was learning Korean. I would apply myself to learn and to read and write and understand Korean. And when I became adept enough at the language, I would open an Ananda center. Because what else would I do? And it was a very deep understanding that this is who I am. It's not Vaishya. It's not for what I can get for it. It's the way I breathe and the way I'm made. Now, Kshatriya is we act on principle. When you finally get to Brahmin, we act only at the direction of God. Kshatriya is still an advancement from Shudra and Vaishya, but where we really have to move is that it's not even principle that guides us, it's the power of spirit within us. And step by step, these are the karmas that we're all working out. We're just, and if it's an unlearned lesson, you see, this is also coming back to an unlearned lesson. It's very good to be devout. It's very good to be faithful. It's very good to believe that God will take care of us. But when God takes care of us in a way that doesn't look to us like He's taking care of us, that's when we teeter on the edge, you see. Why do I love God? Because He does what I want, or because I want to do what He wants? And now Swami talks about this all the way through, about different kinds of karma that comes to us. And he's describing, you know, let's see, let me just try to figure out what's the most important here. Karma that is karma from the past, there's actually words for it. Prarabdha karma. We don't have to know these words, but this is, Swami actually bothers to put them in. What I find so marvelous about Swami putting these words in is there are words for these things. They're not English words, because as we often say, the people who speak English are not thinking about these things. These are Sanskrit words that are exact for all these different nuances of spiritual evolution. So you have to bring in Sanskrit words because you simply can't say it in English. So Swami talks about prarabdha karma is present tendencies that we have that originate from past lives that are now ready to be expressed in this life. And there's also, just to get the words right, pararabdha karma, which is also tendencies from the past, has to wait for a more auspicious moment. It's not worked out. It's just in abeyance. And he uses as an example, perhaps we have the karma that we're going to be drowned at sea, but we've incarnated in the middle of the desert and we're never going to see an ocean. So waiting for us is this experience of drowning. But it's pararabdha karma, the meaning, it's the tendency is there from the past that needs to come to fruition, but it's in abeyance right now. Prarabdha karma is the karma that's going to bear fruit in this lifetime. Now, all of that, just there we have it. This is what we're doing. This is why we incarnate. And the picture that I have, and again, I just make up these pictures. This is not my perception of the astral world, but this is what it feels like to me. That we go into the astral world between our incarnations. And Swami makes, in other places, has made this comment which is so beautiful to really think about. Life in this world is so intense, and it's so real until we exit from our bodies. And the moment we exit from our bodies, we realize that it was a wholly different story than the one we thought. I've heard it said many times from people who've had death and return experiences, what they call near-death experiences, but it means temporary death experiences. They say that this world and the world beyond are much closer together than we think. When we're walking around here and we think about the astral world or the world I'll go to after I leave my body, there's a natural mental inclination to think it's somewhere else. Master said the astral world is completely present right here. They're interwoven, they're different vibrations. We perceive the material vibrations that we can perceive with the senses, but the subtle vibrations are also all around us. So those who are highly enough advanced in the astral world can be aware of this world. But most people in this world, even if there is an expanded spiritual understanding, don't also perceive the astral world. But we feel it. We intuitively know it's there. I don't know how else to put it. When one of my friends died, Paula, she died maybe even as long as 20 years ago. She was a close friend of mine. She was a highly advanced person. She died completely consciously. I've written her story up in Swami Kriyananda's We Have Known Him, and it might even be in Miracles and Answered Prayers also, Loved and Protected. I'm not certain anyway, it's in a couple of places. After she died, I felt her, I still do, I felt her helping me. And I said to Swami, is Paula conscious of this world? And he answered me like this, oh, of course. Just like that. Like, she's as much involved in our reality and serving Master as she has ever been. She's just doing it from another level. But when I asked her, Swami, once about a relative of mine who had passed away, and I wanted to know if they would still be aware of me. And Swami said, he said, only vaguely. They'll be vaguely aware of this world, but they won't be able to bring in the details because their consciousness isn't expanded enough to be able to do that. Now, let me think where I was going with all of this. Oh yes, about, we have this great concern about death and how we die and being ill and all of this, but Swami put out the point that as soon as you leave your body, this whole world just takes on a completely different reality for us, or we just leave it behind. We just step away from it. So, and then we go into the astral world, and our time in the astral world is, I can't really bring these things to an exact focus because I only have a general understanding, but we have astral karma also. And we stay in the astral world as long as it's beneficial to our soul development to stay there. But these unlearned lessons nag at us. These desires and habits that require a material body to experience, they pull on us. Swami said Master said people who are very materialistic and just want to smoke and drink and have sensual experiences and, have fancy cars and accumulate money that they can hold in their hand and all this sort of thing. Master said they don't even actually really wake up that much in the astral world because the astral world is just too subtle. And essentially they don't know it's there. They can't see it because they don't have the vibrations of consciousness within themselves. So they rest for a while and then they find themselves in a physical body again, and then they get all eager and excited and happy. But for us, who I pray will be able to really live happily in a much more refined atmosphere, Swami said that, all of the pure desires that we have for beautiful music, for beautiful scenery, for true and loving friendships, for the opportunity to meditate and to pray and to sing. All the pure uplifted desires are more easily fulfilled in the astral world. And in fact, when a friend of mine named Linda was on her deathbed from cancer, and I put this story into Light Bearer, and Swami came to visit her in the last short period of her life, he said to her, "You have such a love for beauty," because she had always made a beautiful home, and when she was part of our congregation, she single-handedly would decorate the whole temple for Christmas, and she just loved to make things beautiful and had very astral sort of taste, lights and light colors and gold, and she just was wonderful. But Swami said to her, he said, "You have such a love for beauty." He said, "Don't get stuck in the astral world. You'll find that that's so satisfying to be there." He said, "Keep your focus on God." Because it isn't God realization, it's just a more subtle plane of existence. But there's much, much more that we can do. So many highly evolved souls don't really want to spend a lot of time in the astral world. They just want to get on with the project. But the way I sometimes think about it is, we have these lingering material desires. We have these tendencies from the past that are not yet resolved, and they need to come to fruition so that we can face and overcome them and learn the unlearned lessons. So as it seems to me that we're just sort of in the astral world, everything is great. However, and so this is my picture. You know, I have a full evening off at home. You know, all my housemates have gone out. The house is entirely mine. The silence is just absolutely wonderful. I'm going to energize, and then I'm going to listen to a talk by Swami, and then I'm going to chant for a long time, and then I'm going to have a really deep, unbroken meditation. And so I start in, but then I feel just a little bit hungry. And I start thinking, about, gosh, I haven't had pizza in a really long time. And I'm trying hard to concentrate on what I'm doing, but I'm remembering the pizza. And then I think, it's going to be hard for me to meditate if I'm so hungry. And if I keep thinking about pizza, so I'll just dash out to the corner and get one of those pizzas. And so I dash out to the corner, but when I get there, I run into an old friend. And so instead of taking it home, I just sit down and have the pizza with them, and then someone else comes in, and then we all decide to go for a long walk down by the shore, and then at midnight I come home and I see my little meditation seat. And I never really made a conscious decision, but one desire after another desire just pulls me, and suddenly I'm doing something else. And so I imagine us in the astral world just enjoying it, but sort of building up in the subconscious is this karma that needs to be fulfilled. And then all of a sudden, what do you know? I'm in somebody's womb. And there we are. We're just on some planet somewhere, some material universe, and we're just starting over. Okay, let's get down to business. Because the fact of this karma from the past that has now come to fruition, the karma itself is an energy that's been set in motion. I think of it as a boomerang. I've never thrown a boomerang, but I've seen them thrown. You toss it out from one spot, and if you do it properly, it goes on a big trajectory and then comes right back, and you can catch it again. But once it's launched, it's going to come back to the coherent center, which is my ego identification. And there's nothing I can do. It's going to happen. So that could be some of those dreams that I've had about wrong action, or something that I did in a fit of anger in this lifetime, or many lifetimes ago I developed a deep desire for something. Either, Swamiji says, what brings us back into reincarnation is longing and regret. Those are two just really big words. What brings us back into reincarnation is longing and regret. We want something that we didn't have, or we did something that we feel so guilty about, we deeply regret, we want to make it right again. Longing and regret. In other words, we're not karmically current. I think about that a lot. I like to stay karmically current. I mean, I like to pay my bills as soon as they're due. If an idea comes to me that something needs to be said, I try to say it as soon as I can say it. As soon as it's appropriate to say it, somebody asks a favor of me, I try to fulfill it. Yes, if you want to talk to me, let's do it today. And at the latest, let's do it tomorrow. I don't like to have karmic debts building up. For one thing, you never know when you're going to have to leave, and you don't want to have to come back to this world just because you procrastinated. I mean, I don't mean small things like cleaning out a closet or hemming a skirt. I mean real longings and real deep regrets. So we set them in motion, and they bring us back to this world again. But the action that set the boomerang in motion could have been many lifetimes ago, because there's prarabdha karma and then there's pararabdha karma, which means pararabdha, which means that it's held in abeyance. So an action can happen here, but it can be a while before it comes all the way back. It's held in abeyance. But if we think of karma as unlearned lessons, while that karma is held in abeyance because it's doing its little trajectory before it comes back to the coherent center which launched it, which is me, I can have a lot of other experiences. And I can learn a lot of other things, so that by the time it comes back to me, I may be a completely different person. And so what Swamiji says, it's not the karma itself that diminishes us or not. It's entirely how we react to it. You know, a disaster can be turned into an opportunity. A disappointment can be turned into an opportunity for greater compassion. A lost ambition could redirect us towards something that's much more appropriate. Or these things can embitter us and make us angry and set up in our minds a longing for revenge, because not all desires are positive, or just an appalling, debilitating regret about, if only I had done so and so. It's longing and regret. It's not the events themselves that bind us to this world. And things can happen also, like my aura itself can become very, very powerful, because karma is also profoundly affected. I mean, karma of a downward pulling kind, or a challenging kind, or however you want to see it, is mitigated by opposite good actions. If, for example, you saw the opportunity to steal someone's inheritance, and you became very wealthy, but at the cost of that individual, that was an act of terrible greed. So maybe over a number of lifetimes, you began to realize that it wasn't worth it. I'm not going to behave like that anymore. And then a great generosity of heart develops in us. And so instead of being greedy, we become very generous. But maybe that particular karma is still making its way around. It hasn't quite, finished the trajectory of energy that you set out. The thought form that you launched isn't quite resolved in you. But in between, you've become such a different person that, and again, these are partly my own images, but there's truth in them. That in order for the karma to come through to us, there has to be some kind of a matching vibration. And so if the karma is to overcome greed, if we still have a lot of greed in us, that greed vibration will just meet our aura, and it's completely permeable. It'll come through and smack us with all the momentum that's right there. But if during this intervening time, while this karma was in abeyance, we've been developing an aura of generosity and of selflessness and of detachment and kindness and self-sacrifice, when that thought form of greed that we ourselves launched comes to the edge of our aura, whatever our aura is, it doesn't find it so permeable. And it's just like a meteor coming through the atmosphere of the earth, as I understand it, it gets burned up. So the meteor may start quite large, but by the time it gets through our atmosphere, a lot of it will have been dissolved. So the force of this may come as strongly as we launched it, But all the good work that we've been doing in between sets up a vibration that's not the same, and so it's greatly diminished by the time it gets through our aura. And this is how Swami puts it, that the opposite energy can greatly mitigate the karma. And this is what creates this atmosphere around us, going all the way back to, if Master's predictions are valid, which I believe they are, and the confusion that we have experienced in these last year and a half with this pandemic we've been dealing with, just maybe one of many things we're going to have to experience. So what kind of an aura am I building when my Vaishya expectations of how God is going to treat me are disappointed? Do I just get angrier and angrier and madder at God and more fixed and I want? Or does the thought enter our mind, maybe I have to think about this differently? What is reality? What does really cause happiness and suffering? Are all my ideas really the right ideas? And in other words, we start learning the lessons that the challenges and the difficulties are intended to teach us. The intention of everything that happens to us is to move us away from ego definition and more ground us in a self-definition that is based on our relationship to the divine. And so that is the only purpose. Well, let me even phrase it differently. That's the only purpose of everything that happens to us, and every challenging, what we might call bad karma, that we think of, is only sent to us to progress us on this journey away from egoic self-definition to a divine definition. This is now, we're shifting from kshatriya into Brahman. We're shifting from merely having this be like, I believe in these ideas, I believe in them so deeply that I've formed my life around them, into actually knowing. I believe that the divine is with me, but now I know that the divine is with me. So that is the purpose of everything that happens, to break us out of our narrow realities and force us, one way or another, to become conscious of who we really are. Now that's the only purpose. So therefore, why don't we just get ahead of the process? It seems to me, and this is, again, one of the joking ways I've come to think about it, but it's very, very true. We need to move into the light, and we can move eagerly into the light because of a deeply held, based on experience, understanding that everything I want will be found in the light. This is who I really am. So we can either be moving forward toward the light because we experience its beauty, or we, in principle, understand that's what I should be doing. But in any case, we're in motion. Or we can wait until the heat behind us gets so bad that we catch fire from the back, and then we try running away from the pain. But either way, we're going to move toward the light. And unfortunately, being hurt, suffering, often wakens us. And I'm very touched by the fact that Master said he has an argument with Divine Mother. He says that, the way a loving son can argue with his mother without it in any way diminishing his love for her. I have an argument with Divine Mother. Why must she teach her children through suffering? We all have that argument with Divine Mother. Why? But if we're honest, and often it's a hard one, painful honesty, often the most difficult, seemingly impossible situations in our lives are the ones from which we learn and grow the most. I remember a weird moment I was in once where I realized I was so angry. And I couldn't quite figure out what I was angry about. And I finally actually realized that I happened to be sitting in the temple, and I saw the altar, and I realized I was really mad at the gurus. I was furious. And I realized the reason I was mad is because I knew that I was going to have to change and grow in response to the challenge that they'd put in front of me. And I knew that I would change and grow. And I knew it was going to be a very long and difficult effort. And I was really annoyed. I was really annoyed that they were going to teach me through suffering. But I had to concede by the time the whole project was done that probably nothing else would have worked. But we don't have to suffer if we react to the karma that comes to us, not with resistance. One of my friends, I don't have a rubber band here, but she would do this picture of stress, and she put her 2 fingers in a rubber band and pull it enough so that it's tight. But what makes it tight is that one is trying to move this way and the other is either trying to move the other way or not to move at all. But the force, let's call it the force of the part of us that wants to grow, keeps trying to grow. And the part of us that doesn't want to grow keeps stretching that rubber band, and that's where the stress is. But if we keep up with the divine call, we may be, inescapably roped together. But the stress, we don't have to have the stress. The stress is resistance. So the prarabdha karma that we have set in motion, I'm so proud of myself for knowing these words. I will see if I still even remember them next week. But the karma that is the result of actions from the past that have now come to fruition. We can't erase that because we ourselves committed ourselves to this. This is what's happening. But we can totally change the experience by the way we ourselves respond to it. By what do I really want from life? Am I a Vaishya? And that's a really good question to ask. And we're all of these at the same time. It's not like you become purely one or purely another. In some areas of life, one is a Vaishya. The only reason I'll do it is because the consequences of not doing it are worse. That's all. It's not because I love it or in principle or anything like that, whatever it might be. But we ask ourselves, what is God trying to teach me? And in the face of everything that comes, let that be the first question. What is it that I'm supposed to learn here? What is it that I'm supposed to learn? If we can train ourselves in everything that comes to us, whether it's gloriously freeing or very painful or just dull and in between, what is God trying to teach me? What unlearned lesson is being presented to me right now? The spiritual path seems very, very complicated, and to a large extent it is, in the sense that, I don't know, we have so many minutes in a day and life is so complicated, there's so many things going on. But at the same time, it's actually very simple. Well, it's even simpler than that. We have really only one choice in life, which is, do we think with loving acceptance of the divine will, or do we fight against it? I remember somebody asked Swami once, how do I know what my karma is? He said, well, if there's a job to be done and you're next in line. I mean, he just didn't give it any more effort than that. It's like, if it comes to me, Divine Mother, what are you trying to teach me? And sometimes what Divine Mother's trying to teach us is to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, it's not like we have to just passively float. But we have to always ask that question, Divine Mother, what is it that you want from me? What is the appropriate response in this moment that'll bring me more into the light? And everything else is extra. How can I love? How can I serve? How can I draw closer to God? And Divine Mother will just keep sending us event after event after event. until automatically and freely and without hesitation, that is the only thought that comes into our mind. How can I love? How can I serve? God bless you.